just texted Edgar and told him you guys clapped at his name.
Let's talk a little bit about the story of Duran and how what inspired you to want to tell the story.
It started when I made a movie called Sequestro Express in Venezuela that got me in a little bit of trouble with the Hugo Chavez government. So I had to leave Venezuela or they were going to put me in jail. And I moved to Los Angeles, and happily the movie was distributed by Harvey Weinstein and it was well received here. But I started getting offers to do movies about drug dealers and kidnappers, and you know, if you hear the way Donald Trump talks about Mexicans, those were the movies that were being offered to me. You know, so I was like, you know what, let me try to find a story about a Latin hero. Let's try to tell a story about a Latino who's actually somebody you can admire, not a typical drug dealer or rapist or illegal immigrant and all that stuff. So I started searching and I came across with the Roberto Duran story, who I, you know, obviously as a Venezuelan, you know of Roberto Duran all your life, and I started doing research and found this dynamic with his trainer, Ray Arcel, and thought that it was a good opportunity to tell the story of a Latino and cast an American actor that, you know, would allow the size of the budget that you kind of need to tell a story that takes place, you know, in Madison Square Garden, in all these places. It's very hard to make a movie like this with a tiny budget. So that's how I started, you know, and it was a very long process, and, you know, Edgar became a little bit of a star in the process, so it was easier. And we are here, you know, it's more than 7 years in the making.
Well, as I was saying before, I'm a huge fan of Edgar Ramirez, and I'm curious then, since you said he became a star over the time period that you were making the movie, how early did you know he was going to be Duran? Did you write with him in mind?
Not really. The movie had a lot of incarnations, and, you know, there were other actors in the mix. I don't want to name because it really doesn't matter. But Edgar became involved actually after De Niro and Usher. They were attached to the project before, and it was the actor who was going to play Duran couldn't make it. And I've known Edgar for more than 10 years because he's from Venezuela, and he was actually a soap opera star in Venezuela. You know, a lot of people don't realize that he's been a star since he was 18, you know, and you know, he from soap operas jumped to Venezuelan movies, and he was the lead in every freaking Venezuelan movie for like 10 years, you know, so we know each other for a long time. And then, you know, and that was a good thing and a bad thing, because there was a little bit of baggage in my perception of him, you know, because you guys see Edgar as the guy from Carlos and the guy, you know, from all these great movies. I saw him as the guy from the soap opera, you know, so, but it was exciting then to really get to work with him and realize that he is actually a genius actor, you know, and so I approached him, and I remember I asked him if he ever boxed before. He said he never boxed, but he's been in fights all his life. His father was a diplomat, so he traveled all around the world, so he had a first day in school 17 times, you know, so he got bullied 17 times, had to fight himself, you know, to the top. So he has that rage in him, but at the same time he's the sweetest guy, so it was very unique for me to see, because that's Duran, you know, it's the perfect mix between somebody who's really nice and a phenomenal human being, but he has that rage and that darkness that you can tell comes from life experience, that I thought was perfect for Duran. But, you know, it was really a complete transformation for him. I don't know if you guys haven't seen it, you should go on the Facebook page of the movie. There's a 3-minute clip of Edgar's transformation and Edgar training. It's truly unbelievable. He learns to box. He trained for 9 months before even starting to work on the character. You know, because he did the opposite of what you usually do with a role. He became a boxer and then became Roberto Duran. Because he felt that the physical transformation was essential to the performance and to approaching the soul of this character who fights for a living, you know. So it was literally in pre-production that he looked at me and he was like, okay, I know how to box like Duran, but I have no idea how to play. What are we gonna do, you know? And that's, you know, we started a whole process of rehearsals and stuff, and I don't know if you agree, but I think he's mind-blowing in the whole film.
He's fantastic, absolutely. You just said fight like Duran, and that's actually what I wanted to ask you about the boxing training, which is, you know, there are many different styles of boxers. How closely did you model his training on what Duran's style was, and was Duran at all involved or sort of an advisor to the actual, you know, boxing process, learning how to box like him?
Well, part of the good thing that Edgar never boxed before was that he only learned how to box like Duran. He has no idea how to box like anyone else, you know, because that's what he learned. As soon as he got to Panama, Duran's sons started training him. One of them was a professional fighter, the other one was not, but they all fight, you know. All the 6 kids know how to fight, you know, and even the women, you know, they're for real. Like, it's not even a joke. Like, Michelle was a professional boxer, you know, like it's crazy how important it is. I mean, it's not crazy, it's obvious, but it's funny that they actually did it. So they started training him the ABC of boxing like Duran, and he was training with salsa music. You know, when you, and it's really good if you see that clip, you'll see when Duran fights, he fights very different from Mexican fighters because he's fighting with a salsa style. You know, it really is what characterizes Panamanian boxers. They have a completely different rhythm, and it's part of what makes them so hard to decipher because it comes from, you know, the Afro-Latin rhythm of salsa. Edgar learned to play congas, he learned to like do stuff that was what Duran used to do. And after like 3 months training with the Duran kids, and Duran would come in and out, he was a little intimidated by the whole thing. You know, Edgar, like, dude, like, don't bring Duran yet. You know, like, because he didn't want to freak out Duran. This guy's never boxed before, he's gonna play me. So it was mostly his sons. And then what we did is move Edgar to the ghetto, basically, to it's the craziest place I've ever seen. You basically walk into a furniture store and you ask for this gym and they deny there's a gym there. You know, you need to know somebody there, you know, and once somebody greets you because you tell them, dude, I'm here, where's this gym? You know, they come downstairs and you go up 3 stories. And the gym you see there with the kid at the beginning of the movie, that's the gym. You know, it's at the 4th story in the middle of the ghetto, completely hidden, completely secret, because if people knew the Panamanian champs are training there, it would be completely packed with fans. You know, boxing is the national sport, so the boxers in Panama are gods. It's like soccer in Brazil. So Edgar started training there with the world champs. You know, Panama has 29 world champs, so it's a big culture, and their trainers and their people, and the champs themselves started helping Edgar, and everybody wanted to help. It's the story of their national hero. They all know Duran's style by heart because he's their hero. So, you know, it's very, very close. In Edgar and in Usher, you know, anybody who knows Sugar Ray Leonard's style can tell you this is exactly the way Leonard moved. Move by move. Like, Usher is obsessed to a degree that I was like, dude, it doesn't matter if you're a little bit to the left in the ring. He wanted to be exactly in the place where Leonard was when he did this move. I mean, he was obsessive, and thank God it was, because when you see them, we have a clip that we haven't released where you see the real fight and the fight in the movie. And, I mean, to tell you the truth, the first time Harvey saw it, he thought it was the movie. and it's the real fight. And then he was going back and forth, and he couldn't tell which one is which. You know, it's really amazing how exactly they were able to choreograph the whole thing. And Usher was trained by Leonard.
Really?
I mean, he trained by himself for a while, but then Leonard took him, and you know, they trained together for a long time, and Leonard took it very seriously because he's like, you know, you're gonna be playing me, people are gonna be remembering me like you. So
Usher's inspired for the casting. What sort of, where did that idea come from?
I was auditioning for the part, and I wasn't really finding the right actor. And I went to Freddie Roach's gym. Freddie Roach is the guy who trains Manny Pacquiao. He's probably the biggest trainer in the world right now, and a legend himself, you know. And I went to him and I said, is there any boxer that you could recommend to play Sugar Ray Leonard? And he was thinking, and he goes, you know, no boxer can box like Leonard. That's why Leonard is Leonard. You know, nobody has that slick style, that stylized move. I mean, it's the opposite of what most boxers are. You should try to find a dancer. It would be easier to teach a dancer to box than it would be to teach a boxer to fight like Sugar Ray Leonard. And I went home and I thought it was the best dancer in the world and thought of Usher. You know, it was literally like that. And, you know, we reached out and he immediately reacted, and we set up a meeting, and literally the first meeting, Usher started doing the alley shuffle and started doing all these things that Leonard did, and I'm like, I mean, this guy, and obviously it's his hero, childhood hero for him, and it was just meant to be. I mean, afterwards he trained for like a year to really become a boxer, and I don't know how familiar you are with Usher's body. He is so skinny here. You know, people don't recognize him sometimes, and so it's a real big transformation. And Leonard was asking him to send him shirtless pictures every week. You know, you're too fat. You know. Usher's wife immediately the first day on set is like, "Can you tell Usher he's not fat? Just, you know, it's a favor to me." He's really. They're both incredible perfectionists, both Edgar and Usher, and you know, it takes some guts to take on roles like this. You can go on YouTube and see these fights. You know, it really, it's very easy to be criticized, and they worked really hard to make sure that what they did, you know, paid honor to this amazing fighters.
So these are all things that contribute to the accuracy, the realism of the performances and the fights and its choreography. Tell us about how you decided to shoot the fights, because a lot of that work obviously comes through on screen. I mean, especially in those amazing taunting moments in the second fight, where Usher's really got that. It really feels very true to Sugar Ray Leonard's style. So I'm curious about the cinematography, but specifically the fight cinematography, how you chose to shoot it so that you weren't losing all of that hard work, but you were also making it very dynamic as opposed to just like the wide shot that you see on TV back in the days.
How long do we have? I can talk for so long about the fights. I mean, the first thing, there's so many fights in this movie. There's 4 world championships, and there's been so many boxing movies, you know, that people are going to be comparing this to. And I think for me, there was a priority. First, to really show the psychological aspect of the sport, and the movie makes a big emphasis about strategy and, you know, how each of those fights was really fought in their heads more than in the ring. But I also, the technique, I wanted to give each fight a personality in itself, and a personality that reflected the psychological aspect of the fight. For example, the Montreal fight, the first Duran-Leonard fight, is mostly tight shot. It's very violent. The camera was usually far away. You know, when in telephoto lenses, there's barely any wides in the whole thing. when you see that fight, it was like that. They were very close together, fighting and beating each other all the time, and I wanted the audience to really feel a fight, a relentless fight, you know, that never lets you breathe, because that is how Duran won that fight. Duran got Leonard to fight toe-to-toe, and because he knew that's his fight, that's how he could win. When you go to New Orleans, I did the exact opposite. The camera is mostly in the ring, wide lenses, longer shots. You know, Montreal it's completely chopped up. It's frenetic. In New Orleans, you go all around the ring. The stadium becomes a little bit of the character because they're mocking Duran, they're laughing at him, and when you see the New Orleans fight, it's really like that. You know, Leonard is going around the ring and Duran is chasing him, and Leonard is mocking him, and then he comes back for a punch and leaves. So it was very important for the technique to reflect the state of mind of the fight. And I think what is one of the things that I think we accomplished the most is to completely differentiate Montreal from New Orleans. And it was really a completely set of different lenses, you know, in each of the fights. The first fight, the opening of the movie, the Benny Huertas fight, was in many of the shots are shot with a Phantom camera, which is an ultra high speed camera that shoots 600 frames per second. If you remember, the fight is told from Ray Arcel's point of view, and you know, you see this ultra stylized movement. My goal was to show you how Arcel sees a fight different than you do. You know, what he sees is not what you see. You know, he's seen the feet, the knees, shoulders, this part, you know, all this movement at 600 frames per second, you know, and then you cut to his eye, you know, so it's sort of like the surgery of intellectual of boxing, witnessing a fight and inviting you to witness it the way he sees it, you know, with a level of specificity that is a lot more sophisticated than any of us would have when watching a boxing fight. And then the final fight is a little more rocky, you know, more spectacular, cranes and dollies and doing all this stuff, you know, because at the end, Duran becomes who, you know, his destiny was pushing him towards, which is the symbol for his people. He's no longer fighting for himself. He's fighting for everybody who believed in him. He's fighting for Ray. He's an adult now. So the style of the final fight is less specific and more spectacular. You know, it's less about less of an auteur fight and more of an emotional fight. There's a lot of more reaction shots. We cut to the wife, we cut to Ray, we cut to the people of Panama, you know, so it really becomes a celebration. You know he's going to win, you know, this would be the worst movie in history if he loses, you know. But at the same time, you want to give that illusion that it's a hard fight and that he's pulling it off, you know, and I didn't want it to feel like a cheat, like a lot you see sometimes in boxing movies where the guy falls and then has a flashback and comes back, you know. That's, you know, I mean, for one thing, the fight exists and there was nothing like that. It was a massacre from beginning to end. But, you know, I also, I felt that I already had the audience rooting for him and knowing he's going to win, and it's not about is he going to win or not. It's about how he acknowledges who he is, and that's why he wins. In my mind, he wins the fight when he apologizes to Sugar Ray Leonard. You know, from then on, he won the fight. That's really the fight, you know, because he's fighting himself. He's never really fighting Davey Moore. He doesn't care. We don't know anything about Davey Moore. He's fighting himself, and that's when he wins. And the fight is just a celebration and a catharsis after all the suffering him and the audience have gone through. Let's have fun, you know, beating this guy who we don't even know out as much as we can.
Tell us about shooting in Panama. There's I mean, I assume it looked like Panama City to me, particularly obviously now, but I'm curious that I know that they have a kind of a nascent young film industry, but it's not especially developed. So I'm curious if you were able to use local film crews at all, and what was it like to go in and try and bring us back in time to 1980 and earlier?
There is a very small tradition of film in Panama. I'm from Venezuela. We have been making movies for 100 years. So is Colombia, Argentina, Mexico. Panama, I think in its history, has like 3 movies. Pretty incredible how they just haven't made movies. So it was a particular challenge to do a production of this size there. There's a lot of publicity that takes place, and some crews that worked in publicity worked in the movie. But the reality is that I built most of the crew as a dream team of the people that I've ever worked with. The DP is from Chile. I did a series for HBO International with him in Chile. The production designer is from Argentina. The art director is from Spain. The Steadicam operator is from Colombia that I worked with him. So it really felt like a flashback of my entire life. Everybody I had ever worked with and I remember was good. I gave a call and we really created a team of people, mostly Latino, to come to Panama and work on the film. And it was a right decision because, in Latin America we make movies with nothing. We had more than nothing. So my thought was, if you give this budget to an American crew, they're gonna feel it's not enough to make a movie of this size. If you give this budget to a Latin American crew, they're gonna feel they're making the Star Wars. Because we usually make a movie for 1 million. So you have 21 million, you can make 21 movies with that. So. But at the same time, some of my crew, like the production designer was the art director in Memoirs of a Geisha, and he did Savages, and has done a lot of big Hollywood movies, but has done also Argentinian $1 million movies. So it was sort of getting the spirit of working with nothing, but having a little more or a lot more than nothing. And, we ended up shooting 65 days with 15,000 extras, 105 scenes, recreating 4 decades in 5 cities. You do the exact same movie you just saw in the United States, it would be at least 60 or 70 million dollars. And for us, it wasn't even close to that. So it was really about using what we have to the maximum, but also there was a big support from the nation. Panama being the national hero. Madison Square Garden you see here is the Roberto Duran Stadium in Panama. We shot there for free for weeks, and then digitally we found this boutique company in Argentina. I don't know if you guys remember the movie that won the Oscar, The Secret in Her Eyes. I think they just did a remake or something.
Yeah.
In the original movie, there's an incredible sequence over a soccer stadium that's like an 11-minute master shot without cutting, or there's some hidden cuts. Completely packed stadium in Buenos Aires, and I knew that movie was not for nothing. And I was like, if they were able to fill that stadium, they can fill my stadium, And I tracked those guys down. It's like 2 guys in Buenos Aires, and they ended up doing 800 visual effects for the movie, for a price that an American company would have charged, like $5 million, and so it was really finding people who are hungry and are used to working with nothing. Nowadays, you have the advantage of the fact that they have the same computer everybody does. It used to be that the computer is only here. Now everybody has the same Mac, and so you just need to find the right people who are hungry enough to really do something of this size, because for them it's also an opportunity.
Can I ask you for some examples, because besides the stadium, because it's always fascinating, I think, when you learn that a movie that doesn't seem like it has visual effects, in fact has 800 visual effects shots. I mean, that's a credit to the seamlessness of the integration of the effects. But what are some other sort of clever things?
It's what I always tell them. You guys are so good, nobody's going to ask about you. You know, and that's it. But that's the dream. You know, you want people. They were asking me just aside, you really shoot in Madison Square Garden? I'm like, yeah, right. You know. Not only the stadiums are there. I mean, I don't know if you remember the scene where Duran is calling his wife, and you see the Superdome in the background. That's a green screen. You know, I mean, there's a lot of green screens. There's a lot of cleaning up the area, you know, like making sure that this AC unit that is in the middle of a beautiful street, but you can tell the AC is not from 1980, just removing that stuff. There's a bruise on Edgar in the Montreal fight that they did with visual effects, because the fight is so brutal. Duran was kind of untouched at the end of Montreal, you know, but the fight was so brutal in the movie that it kind of felt weird to see Edgar at the end of the fight, you know, without a bruise, you know, so we added the bruise digital, you know, and little things like that to, you know, digital makeup in a few things. There's a few punches that were misses because the camera was in the side, and they digitally brought the guy closer, and it's a perfect punch. You know, so there's a few punches that they move the arm or move the entire body of the guy. Like when Duran is in jail towards the end, there's a punch there that is like, okay, they clearly hit him. That was digital, you know, we moved the guy. But mostly, I mean, the heavy work was done in the stadiums, especially New Orleans, because what I was saying about the wide shot, the wide angle, and the continuous shot, that all sounds beautiful, you know, but you have to create the entire Superdome to move with the same direction you're moving the camera, and to feel that it's there, you know, and there was a combination of real and effects, you know. It's not like we shot on green screen. The New Orleans fight, we actually shot on a hangar that the U.S. Air Force left in Panama when it used to be a military base. So we took a hangar and, you know, put the lights of the Superdome. So there was a base in the background, but it's not even a stadium, you know. It's a hangar. So they really had to create a lot digitally from scratch, and you know, it's pretty impressive. Now, the other thing that is really good about Panama for this movie in particular is that because the Americans were there for so long, there's a lot of locations that are built by the same Americans who were building America in the 50s and in the 40s, you know. So like the locker room in Madison Square Garden, which, you know, looks more like the locker room of Madison Square Garden than the locker room in Madison Square Garden, you know, who looks like nothing. This was the boys' room in the High School of the Americans in the Canal Zone. You know, I remember when I walked in there, my production designer started crying, you know. It's like, I could never build something like this, you know. And so it was really helpful to recreate the U.S. in Panama, especially the interiors. The exteriors is hard. That's why we shot in New York. We shot in New York for a little more than a week. You know, Brooklyn Bridge and all that stuff. There's nothing digital or that you can find in Panama. But exteriors we did in New York. But most of the interiors, U.S., we shot in the American-made Canal Zone in Panama City.
What's the secret to Don King's hair? I'm curious if your makeup and hair people share those secrets.
What's the secret of the original Don King's hair?
Yeah, I mean, well, you had to recreate it.
I don't know. I have to. I mean, you know, my hair guy was this phenomenal, legendary Spanish guy who's done all the Almodovar movies and all that stuff. and you know, Duncan's hair was one of my first questions. He's like, I have something for it, you know, and he literally put it on this guy, and they created this thing. You know, it was like a wig, but then kept adding it. I honestly don't know exactly what it was. I know it looked perfect, and you know, when you're directing and something works, you don't need to ask. You know? There's a lot of other things that are not working that you need to.
Working with really good.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the more people who know what they're doing you have around, the better the chances for everybody to not realize that you don't really know anything.
Let's take some questions from out here. Yes.
How did you get Robert De Niro to be in your film?
Well, I was, I'm at CAA, which is the same agency that represents him, so I was able to get him the script, and my first movie, Sequestro Express, that was the first step. You know, I knew that in the late 70s, when De Niro was preparing for Raging Bull, he met Duran. And Duran was champion of the world, and they had a good thing. They played softball in Central Park, America versus Panama. Panama won, you know, so Duran tells that story everywhere he goes. So I knew there was something there. And I sent a letter to De Niro, sent him the script, sent him the movie, and De Niro agrees to meet. You know, that's all it was. And I flew to New York, and you know, he's become very close to me right now. He wasn't very nice at first meeting. And, you know, he tells me, listen, I really like your movie. I like the script. But, you know, if you're going to do a serious boxing movie with me, you're going to be compared to Raging Bull. Mm-hmm. That's a very bad thing, you know? Like, you don't want to be compared to Raging Bull in any capacity, because you're not going to never win that battle. And it's a problem for you, it's a problem for me, so, you know, find someone else. So, you know, not really like that, but he was saying, you know, if we got to do it, we got to do something really special, but he was intrigued by the role, but he said something very interesting. He said, I think you did everything right in the political background and the Duran story and all that stuff, but I really can't hear Ray Arcel's voice. And if I can't hear his voice, I can't really play him. You know, which was a little bit terrifying for a writer who was not born in America, learned English as a second language, learned to write in English, I don't even know how. Find the voice of a guy who was born in 1899 in Harlem is pretty difficult, you know. But you know, it was really a 5-minute meeting, and he said, "Find his voice, and I'll do the movie." You know, so I walk out of the meeting thinking I'm so freaking close to getting Robert De Niro to do my movie, but yet so far. And it was a magical thing, because I'm in New York City, and I know Stephanie Arcel lives in New York City. And I know she may still be alive, because she was in a documentary very recently. So I asked my wife to look up if she can find a phone number for Stephanie Arcel. And she says, I didn't find the number, but I found an address. So I literally get in a cab and go to the address. And the intercom says Ray Arcel. Okay, so I get the intercom, nobody answers. I'm like, fuck, it was too good to be true. And then the guard comes and says, who are you trying to reach? And I say, Stephanie Arcel. She's like, oh, just go up there. She can't hear the intercom. Just go up there and knock on the door. Okay, so I'm like, okay. I know she's like 94, you know. I'm thinking, I don't want to scare this woman, you know. This 94-year-old, this freaking Latino shows up at his door, and anything can happen. So I go up, and I'm, you know, taking off my leather jacket and trying to look like a nice Jewish boy. and I knock on the door, and this beautiful 94-year-old lady who I've seen in all these documentaries, she's like, yes. And I tell her, I just met with Robert De Niro. I'm doing this movie about Roberto Duran and his relationship with Ray Arcel, and he asked me to find his voice. And she's like, would you like to come in? And I'm like, if you don't mind. And she says, well, you look like a guy who can use some help. And I walk in, and it's literally like a temple of Ray Arcel. We're talking pictures, trophies, diplomas, articles, recognition. Everything is screaming Ray Arcel in the walls. And she sits down, and she tells me, so what is it exactly you need? And I tell her what De Niro wanted. And she said, get me that notebook over there, And I find some notebook that she has on her drawer, and she says, give it to me, I'll read it to you. And she says, this is what I call Rayisms. Things that only Ray used to say. In other words, his voice, And she starts reading, to rest is to rust. She starts reading half the script. Like a lot of the lines that you hear in the movie were direct quotes from that notebook. And obviously, after getting his voice, it was easier for me and Bob, as we started working together, to really capture who he was. And I literally recorded her reading these lines on my iPhone, and I sent it to Bob 30 minutes after our meeting, and I think I found her voice. And of course he was blown away. He's like, this is crazy. This is how things happen. You actually went there and you found her, and she had his voice, and so that's where it started. And I started developing the script based on that, and I sent after like a month or so a new draft. So De Niro, and he spoke just like Robert De Niro. It's the weirdest thing, like he literally had the same tone of voice and everything. So, I also sent that to Bob, and he became very, very involved and was in many ways the godfather of the project. The financing fell apart many times. He was the one who encouraged me to go to Panama and try to put together financing over there, because we couldn't get it made here. It's crazy to think, but even with this cast and this story and everything, it was really impossible to get it made in the United States. And De Niro told me, it's like a Corleone advice. He said, you should go to Panama. This movie is important for the world, but it is for sure the most important movie in the history of Panama. And money sometimes has to have a reason to invest in a movie. And you're more likely to find that reason in the country where Roberto Duran is the national hero. I mean, it sounds obvious, but it's pure wisdom, And I literally moved to Panama with my wife to put together financing. And after a year, we were able to raise more than $20 million. Door to door, knocking on every person who had money and wanted to tell the story of Roberto Duran. Everybody put a piece of it, and we put together a pool of investors that basically includes the entire nation, and because of that, everybody wanted to give us stuff for free because they put money in the movie, so it became like a big national project, and the government also gave us $2.8 million, which also helped a lot. And we found a local partner, and people gave money to him because we were not Panamanians. Nobody really knew us, so it was very helpful because you don't want to tell people, give me $1 million. I just met you, because in Latin America it's like, yeah, right. So they gave the money to him, and he vouched for us because he became very close to us, and he's a very rich guy, so everybody knew he wasn't going to steal the money. So, it was a beautiful process, a very, very tough process, but it was worth every second, because then in that process I spent a year in Panama, which is impossible to find a better thing for a filmmaker who's telling this story, to really spend a year in Panama. That's what you should do. You know, you would never do it. Usually you'll just be here in LA, and then the movie gets made, you go into pre-production, and you really don't have time to capture the essence of the story you're trying to tell. So for me, it was a big part of why I knew what to do. You know, I knew the nuances of all the streets, every location you see there. It's a year-long scout. You know, every time I saw a good location, this is it. You know, so I became a little bit of an expert in Panama City. By the time the crew came, I had all the answers, and so did my wife, who produced the movie. You know, we knew everybody by then, so it was really, we didn't even have a production service company. We produced the movie ourselves because we kind of felt like locals at that point.
Yes.
Yeah. Was it difficult for you cutting the story where it was right there against the Moore fight? Because Duran had a great career. He fought another 18 years after that. And probably his best fight was when he won the middleweight title against Barkley. That was the fight of the year. So was it difficult to compact his career in that moment a little during the process?
It's very difficult. Not only that fight, but even
The Hagler fight too.
the Hagler fight, but even the Jesus fights, you know, which is earlier. You know, it's an incredible rivalry. Duran, you know, had 125 wins. It's unbelievably long career. But I mean, to me, it was always clear that I wanted to tell a classic, you know, rise, fall, and redemption story, and I really wanted to get into the No Mas fight and really try to understand what happened in that fight. And his real comeback after No Mas was Davey Moore. You know, so you know, if the movie opens and makes a ton of money, we can do Hands of Stone 7. You know, I mean, there's definitely source material. I hope I don't do them all, but it was definitely part of the big decision, you know, what to take out and how to give such a large life dramatic sense and dramatic structure. I think, you know, it was important for me as a writer to keep some classic structure, because in a way you're telling the story about a guy who's fighting Americans. He's a bad boy, he insults the wife, he's doing everything the classic hero would never do. You know, the classic movie would be about Leonard, and Duran would be the devil. Think about it, you know, the big comeback is Leonard. The guy who insults the wife is Duran. You know, I mean, he does all the things you usually get the Hollywood villain to do, but I was doing the movie about the villain, and I thought the best way to really grab the audience into rooting for the villain is to bring them to the classic structure of rise, fall, and redemption, and that's how I wanted to establish it from the beginning, and I think at the end, you know, I mean, some people are rooting for Duran all the way. Yeah. You know, we showed the movie to Ushers' friends, and he's like, "I can't believe you got me to go against Leonard." But you know, even some people, you know, hardcore Americans, you know, feel a harder time rooting for the guy who's fighting the American fighter. We've had some of that feedback, but in the end, they don't. In the end, because he fought his demons and he apologized and he becomes all that, they're rooting for him. And that to me was the biggest goal, that you at the end are able to understand everything that he is, and simply, you know, the way life is. Life is not perfect. People are not perfect. And Duran never claimed or tried to be perfect, and that's why he's so sexy as a hero, because he's a bad boy, you know, he's not a saint, and that's what really intrigued me the most about him, and why I'm still in love with this movie after so many years.